Hello. I looked into Assassin's Creed Steam reviews at launch to understand what people actually think about this game. So let's get into it. Here's some disclaimers and biases before we start. And this is what the structure is going to be like. We'll start with general statistics about the reviews, and then we'll move on to language and country to understand how different countries rate the game. We'll look at reviews by account age to see if new or Steam users like it better or worse. We'll look at some game interactions, like people who like Assassin's Creed 2, did they like the game? And last but not least, we're going to do some analysis of actual review contents and what people are talking about. So let's start with the review numbers. Better understand the review numbers, we should first look at the 2020 Steam boom. So in 2020, Steam's user numbers went from a 3-year flat period to a very rapid increase. This also reflected in review numbers. Actually, it was reflected stronger in review numbers. Even the classics you see on the screen, which were released much before 2020, had big jumps in their reviews after 2020. This is important because when we compare review numbers of games, the release date will make a big difference. A game that was released before 2020 will likely have fewer reviews because of this big boom in 2020. With this context, let's compare Assassin's Creed games review numbers starting with the latest games. So I analyzed this data on the 46th day of Assassin's Creed Shadows release. In that time period, Assassin's Creed Shadows accumulated around 20k reviews. 20% of it is dislikes. Does it mean it's an 8 out of 10 game? I don't think so. It kind of does. But you see, Steam doesn't use a numerical rating system. It is likes and dislikes, basically. While it's a pretty good indicator, and it is useful when you're comparing games within Steam, because all of them are rated on the same system, it is difficult to jump to a numerical conclusion from this. All it gives you is the percentages of people who liked or disliked the game. This rating depends heavily on what is the numerical limit that people have in their minds for upvoting a game. So ask yourself this. If I'm upvoting a Steam game, what is the minimum score that it is in my mind? So if every upvote is a 10 and every downvote is a 0, it would mean 8 out of 10. But as you can see, different averages would mean different potential rating. So I'm not that personally a fan of such a system, but it is what it is. With that in mind, let's compare the first 46 days of Assassin's Creed games on Steam. These are the 3 Assassin's Creed games that were released after 2020. So Mirage and Valhalla weren't big on Steam, probably because they weren't initially released on Steam. With this huge advantage over them, Assassin's Creed Shadows appears to have more reviews and probably more sales on Steam than these games. When we look at some of the games before 2020, we see that Origins and Odyssey were the biggest Steam releases. Odyssey started with a low upvote ratio due to some technical issues on release, but it later became a very well received game. If we take into account the 2020 boom, I think it is safe to say these 2 games actually had stronger launches on Steam than Shadows, especially Origins. And keep in mind you should be multiplying the numbers before 2020 by 5 or 10 or something. Now, there is also another game I want to compare Shadows to, which is Ghost of Tsushima. It clearly had better reception and likely better sales. Let's look at the daily cumulative numbers. So Shadows has a stronger start compared to Mirage and Valhalla, but like I said, these games were originally not released on Steam. They came to Steam like a year later. When compared to Origins and Odyssey, it looks like Shadows might not be able to beat their reviews even with the advantage of being a post-2020 game. it will likely need to be put on really good offers during Steam sale periods. If I tried to put Ghost of Tsushima on this chart, it would literally be off the charts. I mean, it wouldn't fit the scale. So from this, I can say Shadows definitely doesn't impress as a AAA launch. I wouldn't consider it successful for what it is. If it were like a $20 million game, it's okay. The performance is nice. But for what it is, the performance is not good at all. And considering it's a post-2020 release, it appears to have performed worse on launch on Steam than Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Origins. So I expect these games have sold more than Shadows on Steam, and Shadows is not going to actually catch up to those numbers. It appears to do better than Valhalla and Mirage, but like I said, those games released on Steam much later, so it's not really meaningful. It obviously did much worse than Ghost of Tsushima, and remember, Ghost of Tsushima was a console port when it came to Steam. It wasn't even a full-on original release, and yeah, it's a bad situation. Let's talk about language and country statistics. Let's start with language. So, as you would expect, English and Chinese are the two biggest languages in reviews. They are followed by German and Russian, and the other bigger languages and smaller languages are close to each other, while Japanese makes only 1% of the reviews. If we look at upvote ratio by language, we see that Far Eastern languages have lower upvote ratios. Especially Chinese makes a big impact here, as it makes up a large portion of all reviews. Japanese and Korean are also on the lower end. Now, these reviews are by review language and not country, but it is interesting to see as you go to the right of this chart, you also kind of go east on the world map too. I want to look at how the games are rated by the people who use the local language of the game's setting. Assassin's Creed 2 takes place in Italy, and it has a high ratio of upvotes by Italian speakers. Same as Assassin's Creed Brotherhood. The last game of the trilogy takes place in modern-day Turkey, and we see that Turkish speakers rated it as the same as the average. Unity is in France, and French speakers rated it lower than average. Odyssey is in Greece, and Greek speakers really liked it. Valhalla takes place in Scandinavia, and Scandinavia is officially Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. If we take those three languages, we can see that they liked it better than average, but these people speak really well English, so they might be leaving more comments in English than their own language. Let's look at AC Shadows and Ghost of Tsushima. It appears that both of these games performed worse with the Japanese-speaking reviewers. Ghost of Tsushima still got 90%, which is impressive. Now, to understand this issue deeper, I decided to actually go through the Japanese reviews for these games, especially the downvotes, to understand what the audiences really disliked. So the number of downvotes for Shadows and Ghost are 36 and 45 respectively. Shadows has fewer reviews in Japanese, so it makes a bigger portion of its total. Most of these negative reviews mention technical issues in both games. These are like crashes, background music not working, not being able to turn on the game, etc. Another common topic is gameplay issues. These are more about intended gameplay systems that the players didn't like. One of the most prominent one for Ghost is the weather changing due to honor system, for example. For Shadows, a lot of people dislike the story and combat. The part that I was more curious about was the comments about the Japanese representation. Ghost only has one comment, and it complains that samurai are always shown as violent and murderers. I mean, this is a video game, so we're here to murder stuff. And Shadows, on the other hand, has 9 comments about the bad representation. I made a list of some of them. These are some things those comments say about Japanese cultural elements in the game. Please pause here and read through these if you like. These have a great attention to detail. And if you look at the third comment here, the reviewer doesn't like the material of the flutes, the shape of the mats, the harvest season of the rice, and the fact that they burn incense at the shrines, for example. The fifth comment mentions that women shouldn't be able to stand in the sumo ring and they shouldn't be monks. The sixth says it looks like Japan as seen by foreigners, which would make me really sad if I was a writer or a part of the game's art team, basically. All in all of these seem to me like this wouldn't happen if they had real Japanese consultants or listened to them. So, my conclusions based on the language analysis here. So, Far Eastern gamers appear to have disliked the game more, especially the Chinese. And the game couldn't capture the Japanese audience as well as it does many other audiences through cultural representation. We see that 25% all negative Japanese reviews talk about bad cultural symbolism and representation here. So the issues aren't limited to Yasuke. There are many other problems as we saw in the comments. Now let's move on to country. So country is a little different because we can only see public information that people share on their accounts. Around half of the reviewers have their country information public, so we have about 10.5k reviewers available. The biggest countries are USA, China, and Germany. Japan sits at 3% here. If we look at the countries the same way we looked at the languages and mark the Far Eastern countries, we see that China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan sit below average. Japan is about average and South Korea is above average. So we see here that China and the countries around it are actually rating the game lower. This is what the map looks like. There appears to be a slight west to east split on the map. Notice that I picked 75% as the midpoint. It is my opinion that in the current day and how people rate things, 75% is actually mid and 50% is very bad. Therefore, please take this map with a grain of salt here. If I picked 50% as the midpoint, the entire map would be very green. I want to do the same exercise we did on languages with countries this time. So, people from Italy like Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood slightly more than the average. Turkish people like Revelation slightly more than average. French people like Unity slightly less than average reviewer. The British are the same as the average. Egyptians and Greeks absolutely love their games. Scandinavians are like it's alright. Iraqi people think Mirage is perfect. Japanese people think Shadows and Ghost are as good as what the average reviewer thinks. So keep in mind that Ghost already has a 94% overall rating, so it is already difficult to improve over that. So some cultures receive their corresponding games better than others. The Japanese haven't found Shadows anything exceptional here, but we cannot make a lot of different conclusions from this than what we already made about languages. I want to see how account age affects the game's reception. Let's look at how account age impacts reviews. So, firstly, I have a theory. Can account age indicate user age? It is unlikely, but my gut says younger accounts would have a lower average user age, although I cannot guess the magnitude of this difference. Unfortunately, we have no way of proving this, as we cannot see people's birthdays. So, that being said, 17K out of 20K reviewers have their account age public. So that's a pretty good portion. Here we are seeing the account age distribution of upvoters and downvoters. Notice the proportion of younger accounts is higher in the upvoter distribution, albeit only by a couple percent. If my gut is right and the younger accounts does mean younger user, does this mean younger people are more likely to like this game? So could this be the modern audience everyone's talking about? Let's also look at the upvote ratios per account age. Younger accounts really do look like they like it better. I think we might have found the modern audience here. So let's move on to interactions with the other games. Oh, let's look at Shadow's reviews of people who upvoted the last 4 Assassin's Creed games, for example. So they overwhelmingly like this game too. People who liked both Origins and Odyssey like this game to a lesser extent, but it is still a pretty good rating. I look at people who upvoted the entire Ezio trilogy, and they seem to like this game too. People who liked Valhalla like it. People who didn't like Valhalla don't really like it that much. People who liked Mirage like it. People who don't like Mirage don't really like it. People who liked Ghost of Tsushima also like it decently. So I couldn't really find a sensational stat here that would look interesting. It is 90% of data analysis, so things are usually just normal. This is what it looks like for people who own different numbers of Assassin's Creed games. It does look like people who own more Assassin's Creed games vote more favorably, but it is difficult to comment as the numbers are really small here. This is the people who actually played those games for at least 10 hours. So the numbers towards the end get really small, so it is difficult to comment on percentages. I would argue there isn't much of an effect here, and I couldn't find much interactions between games, honestly. So if you want me to look at other stats, let me know. I want to move on to review contents, which is actually the most fun part of this entire thing. So, on to review contents. Now, remember I told you about the binary nature of Steam reviews and how they don't translate into numerical ratings? Is there a way to understand how much upvoters like the game versus how much downvoters hate it? Yes, there is. Upvotes and downvotes will have a wide range of positivity in their sentiments. People are pushed into two very wide camps, regardless of how strongly they feel about the game and how strongly they feel about their vote. So, we can take the reviews and put them through language processing models trained on huge amounts of data that can understand the amount of positivity in a text. So basically, what we do is we take the reviews, we feed these reviews into those models, and we can find the degree of their positivity. So that's what I did. I put all reviews through a language processing model, which scores them 0 to 1. 1 is perfectly positive and 0 is perfectly negative. Here are the mean and median positivity scores for reviews based on their votes. We actually see a strong polarization of sentiments here, which is often the case with such voting systems. But if we were to calculate a weighted average from the mean positivity score, we would get a 6.7 out of 10 for the game. And this is how it's represented by a density graph. The orange one is the negative reviews and the blue one is the positive reviews. The polarization is obvious, with some positive reviews being more on the neutral side compared to the other group. So positive voters are slightly less convinced than negative voters about their vote. Let's look at the content. This is the word cloud of all comments. Non-English comments have been translated by Google's AI translator. The more common the word, the bigger it appears here. This is a good place to pause the video if you're interested in this. As 80% of the reviews are positive, we see a lot of positive words here. You can see here that Yasuke is a big talking point, and we'll circle back to this later. Things related to the game's visuals are also decently common. I think it is fair to say that the graphics are one of the stronger points of this game, so that's why we see these words a lot. Some other games are also mentioned in the comments, like Tsushima, Valhalla, and Odyssey. So we can assume that people tend to compare games in their comments. So if I were a game developer, I'd always compare what I offer versus what is out there on every aspect, because people obviously compare. Let's take this entire word cloud and turn it into two. This is what the word cloud for upvotes and downvotes separately looks like. This is again a good place to pause if you want to check it out for yourself. Both groups talk about visuals. Now, we cannot say that the sentiment about the visuals is positive just by looking at these word clouds, but looking at the game's visuals, I will jump to the conclusion that both sides talk positively about the graphics. Sometimes you jump to conclusions here, like high probability conclusions, rather than digging for statistics about every minute thing. I mean, time is money after all. We see that the plot and the stealth are also rather major talking points on both sides. I cannot jump to any conclusions about these ones because I haven't experienced them, but I highlight them here in case you played the game and have an idea what this might mean. Now to the most obvious one. Both groups have Yasuke as one of their most repeated words. Now, in my mind, the downvotes don't require any further analysis as it is easy to guess what they're saying about Yasuke. But what could the upvotes be talking about when they talk about Yasuke? We can do the same machine learning exercise with this group. For this, we split the positive reviews into two groups. One group mentions Yasuke and the other one doesn't. We then compare how positive they are about the game in general. These are the outputs of the machine learning model. We see that the reviews that don't talk about Yasuke are more positive in both average and median. The statistical indicators show a significant small difference between sentiments here. And this is the density plot for sentiments of the two groups. You can see that when Yasuke is mentioned, that is the orange group, we get a milder stance on positivity, which visually represents the difference in sentiment towards the game. So we can say that positive reviews that mention Yasuke are actually less positive on average. So on to the conclusions here. So from the contents, we can see that the game has good graphics. Nobody can deny that. Yasuke is the biggest talking point overall, and positive reviewers who talk about Yasuke review the game slightly worse than those who don't. Overall, it is safe to say choosing Yasuke as the main character has hurt the game's reception. The impact of Yasuke could be bigger than what I can observe in reviews, as it might have caused a boycott effect too, but it's impossible to see from Steam reviews, obviously. So that's it. Thanks for watching. What game would you like to see next, and what statistics would you like me to look at? If you leave a comment, I'll make it a part of my process.